Dodger Baseball, brought to you by the makers of Lucky Strike, the cigarette that's made better to taste better.
Be happy, go Lucky Strike today.
The makers of Camel cigarettes bring the world's latest news events right into your own living room. Sit back, light up a Camel, and be an eyewitness to the happenings that made history in the last 24 hours. The Camel News Caravan presents Today's News Today.
The cigarette people spend a tremendous amount of money on television. The shows were sold directly to the advertiser. The advertiser paid for them, and the advertiser decided where to put them, what network, what time periods.
Chesterfield brings you the Perry Como Show, all the top tunes on TV.
Chesterfield is best for you, much milder, better tasting too. They're today's best cigarette buy. Come on, smokers, why don't you try?
Chesterfield,
best for you.
Chesterfield,
best for you.
King size, regular, either way. Make it Chesterfield's today.
Advertisers controlled literally all of the daytime programming, and the primetime programs were all controlled by advertisers. The cigarette companies had a great deal of clout with the networks and were able to place their programs basically where they wanted them. That Philip Morris, for example, was a company that had a great deal of clout with CBS.
Philip Morris, America's most enjoyable cigarette, presents the Lucille Ball Desi Arnaz Show, I Love Lucy.
Lucille Ball and Desi Arnaz would become million-dollar stars, but the product they sold would be $1 billion business. From the show open to the final fade, selling was what it was all about. Lucy and Desi wouldn't even go to their separate beds without one last puff.
How about a good night cigarette, Ricky?
Thank you, Lucy. Nothing but the best, huh?
That's nothing but Philip Morris.
The cigarette companies controlled the show. Their agencies usually owned the show. They made all of the content decisions, and the only negotiations that we had with our clients was price and time period.
If there was a price to pay for success, no one was adding it up yet. For the time being, the price was right.
In case you don't know from what we've already shown you back there, it's a little thing we do called Price is Right. Another thing, thanks to all of you in the advertising end of the Newport organization for helping us with our messages. They're good, straightforward, conversational pieces. I mean, there are not a lot of things to point to and juggle and run around the stage. We just get a chance to stand up and talk and tell everyone how we like Newport with a hint of mint.
Certainly, if advertising agencies and the cigarette companies they represented controlled the programs, it was only natural that they were on the set, welcomed or not.
Most of us were sort of what we used to call agency finks, and we were sort of negative factors, in my opinion. Now that I've been on the production side since, I don't think the agency guys contributed a lot.
The $64,000 challenge. And now, the star of our show, where challenger meets champion, with $64,000 at stake, Sonny Fox.
It was live, Tuesday night, people going for $64,000. The sponsors came, the network came, everybody was in the client booth and in the audience. And they always assigned somebody from an agency to come and make sure that the signs, there was a Kent package, cigarette sticking out of it, on one booth, and there was a Kent sign on the other side of the stage, and in the middle there was this big Kent sign that read out Kent, and this one executive came. He's an executive. They were all vice presidents in charge of making sure the Kent sign was up. And one thing he didn't know is in New York City, you don't mess with the prop men, the grips, the guys backstage. Well, he had them for an hour setting the Kent sign, more this way, more that way, and they were really ticked. You could see they were mad. About 30 seconds before the show, remember it's a live show, 30 seconds before that show, the Kent sign mysteriously fell down to the ground. And this guy went bananas. I mean, running up, put the sign back up. We're going, it's live. And they did that show without the Kent sign for the very first time. We never saw him again. He was out.
The second half of the Gary Moore Show is brought to you by Winston.
If you bought a show, or even half of the show, frequently the talent or some part of the show would be devoted to the product so that there was a very direct association. I mean, obviously, if somebody has a lot of acceptance or credibility in the home, getting that somebody to sell your product works.
Great show, Rocky. You really were the best man tonight. In that case, how about a bonus? Like a carton of Kent's. Oh, I'll top you, Rocky. Here are 2 cartons. One for you, and the other... I know, to give to a friend who smokes another brand. So he can see how his taste buds grow clear and alive with Kent. Acting or selling, you are the best man. And I've got the best cigarette to help me.
You know, the life of the bounty hunter was pretty rough. He lived hard, and he moved fast. Oh, thanks, Ray. But when I'm off stage, I like to stop and think, figure things out. That's why I smoke Viceroys. And when you think your way through all the filter claims, you come to the cigarette with a thinking man's filter and a smoking man's taste. Viceroy.
Well, you seem happy today.
Well, why shouldn't I be? I have the 2 things that would make any man happy. A gorgeous wife, and I'm smoking a Kent.
Which do you like the best?
Now, there's a tough one. Let me see. For cooking and for dancing and kissing, you satisfy best. But for filter and taste, Kent satisfies best.
I'll accept that.
Yeah, who is it?
It's Maurice. Can I talk to you, Phil?
That's Maurice Gosfield. You know the fellow who plays Doberman in the show? He's got nothing to talk to me about. But the tip is out that I just got a carton of Camels. Watch this. Watch how he tries to wheedle a pack out of me. Come on in, Maurice.
Hiya, Phil.
Hello, Maurice.
Say, Phil, what time is rehearsal tomorrow?
What time? Same time as it's been all year.
Oh, really?
Oh, look, a carton of Camels. Come on, get out of here.
Thanks, Phil.
Can't blame him, though. He wants his pleasure. So do I. Won't you join us?
Generally, commercials were 30 seconds or a minute long. But in a live show controlled by the sponsor, who was keeping time?
And now, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to do some advertising for my sponsor, Camel Cigarettes. I really do not have to mention Camel Cigarettes. I don't even have to mention the word Camels. I don't have to mention my sponsor. I don't have to, but the unemployment agencies are jammed.
Comedian Ed Wynn, like many others, would build entire sketches around commercials. Or perhaps more accurately, commercials around sketches.
Yes?
I'd like a package of those delicious, mild Camel cigarettes. Please.
Yes. Unquestionably, she's being paid by the sponsor. Yes, ma'am?
I'd like a package of Camel cigarettes, please.
Camel?
Yes.
Oh, there's some up there. There you are, miss.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Oh, you better make that 2 packages.
You mean you want another package of Camels?
Yes, please.
You just thought of that? You made it up yourself?
I just happened to be in the neighborhood, and I thought I'd drop in for a pack of Camels.
Camel cigarettes?
Yes, you have Camels.
Well, I'll look.
No.
This, huh?
I want a pack out of this carton. Hurry it up, son. Will you hurry it up? This is a disgrace. You call that advertising? You've been at it 3 days. Where's that carton of Camels?
What carton?
Get another carton of Camels.
Get another carton yourself.
Before it was over, Camel received more than 11 minutes of non-stop commercial time on this Ed Wynn Show advertisement. Cigarette endorsements, even through jokes, made the golden age of TV a very valuable time for the cigarette manufacturers.
Now we're getting somewhere. A lucky strike, eh? What made you think it was a lucky strike?
I ain't talking.
What made you think it was a lucky strike?
Because it was so round, so fine, so fully packed, so free and easy on the draw.
Can you remember that, Wilson? Are you kidding? How'd you know it wasn't a banana?
Because they let me taste it. It was a lucky strike, all right, because luckies taste better, cleaner, fresher, smoother. Lucky strike, lucky strike.
You have to remember that cigarette smoking was an okay thing to do. But up on Broadway, there was a billboard with a hole in it. It blows out smoke rings. And every month or 2 months, they would put a new baseball hero or movie star, whoever they paid, and he'd be on the poster with his mouth open like that. But smoke rings would come out of it. So everybody was into, smoking, and smoking was a good thing because nobody knew they were bad for you, or at least the public didn't know.
The general attitude of the American public, as I learned it as I grew up, was one of acceptance of tobacco cigarettes as a social norm, almost a requirement in order to be part of an in-group.
How about a Winston?
Well, everybody's smoking Winston.
This filter cigarette really tastes like a cigarette.
Cigarette advertising was positioned to make it look like it was the right thing to do. The idea of being popular, of being desirable, of being attractive, of being sexy. All of these things are done by positioning a given product with a given scene. Very persuasive.
Take a puff. It's springtime.
Coming up next, the slogans, the spokesman, a healthy attitude, and a health scare. Could there be something unhealthy the commercials weren't telling us? When Time Machine continues here on A&E.
Now I'd like to offer you a Philip Morris, sir. I wonder if you have one of your own brand handy, do you?
I certainly do.
Now I want you to light up one of these 2 cigarettes and let it come slowly through your nose. That's the way, sir. That was the Philip Morris first, is that correct?
That's right.
All right, let's try exactly the same thing now with your own brand of cigarette. Here's a light for you, Mr. Adams. Remember, through your nose now. All right, sir, by your own choice. Now, what difference did you notice between the 2?
As a matter of fact, quite a difference.
Cigarette advertising. From its inception, it represented TV selling at its best. Straightforward, uncomplicated, unrelenting. It took a product, told us why we wanted it, how to use it, when to try it. If not in truths, it told us in plain, simple, and memorable terms.
Are you smoking more now, but enjoying it less? Light up a Kent, and you've got a good thing going.
A name you can trust. A treat you can trust. It's a real tobacco taste.
It's America's finest cigarette.
Lucky's taste better.
That's why we rest our case on your test for taste.
Believe in yourself. Yes, that's what Philip Morris asks you to do.
Cigarette ads have always been the prime example of how you sell an undifferentiated product. That is to say, they're all alike. Cigarettes are all the same. So you had to find other things to sell.
But I think the advertising was so memorable because of the slogans, the imagery. It was always first class, always very well done. I've always heard it said that tobacco marketers are about the best marketers in the world.
They're almost as if they're implanted in my genetic material. They came on so often and they were so well done. I mean, LS, MFT.
Lucky Strike means fine tobacco.
Or call for Philip Morris. Or I'd walk a mile.
For a camel.
There are just so many of those ads were marvelous, and a child growing up in that era, it just had to be tremendously influential as to how the child looked at the world in general.
The sales Cammel's pitch was even more effective when it was done one-to-one, a smooth-talking spokesman speaking to a susceptible buyer.
Boy, that's good, especially when it's a Lucky.
I think you had to believe him, you know? He had to be somebody that could look you in the eye and say, hey, you can use this cigarette. This cigarette's the greatest. I use it, and, you know, that kind of thing.
As for taste, I can only point to the fact that last year, more smokers changed to Kent than to any other cigarette in America. They must like
I can see their faces as I think back. Dennis James is one I obviously remember. And people like him who did stand-up commercials, in effect. I mean, they were really salesmen.
Well, folks, this is Dennis James. You know, they ask you to do a lot of things with cigarettes today. They ask you to sniff them, to try them on your eyes, to try them on your nose, to try them on your throat. Well, I'm going to ask you to do something that's completely revolutionary. I'm going to ask you to smoke a cigarette to see if you like it. Yes,
but Dennis James sold a cigarette the way Sinatra sold a song.
For your own rich, wonderful pleasure, because that's important. Yes, sirree. Yes, pleasure. Real pleasure.
At that time, we said if you smoke for pleasure. You know, in one of my commercials, I something about the people tell you they smell good, or they this good, or they are that good. All I'm telling you, if you enjoy a cigarette and smoking for pleasure, you'll get a treat instead of a treatment with an Old Gold cigarette. So give them a try. Okay? Okay.
Smoke the cigarette made by tobacco men, not medicine men. Get Old Golds today.
Certainly an endorsement from a cool TV announcer or an affable host was effective, but cigarette manufacturers enlisted an even more believable figure from 1950s middle-class life, the family doctor.
Is it true, Miss O'Brien, that you visited a famous throat specialist every week for a 30-day period, and that he carefully examined your throat each time?
It is.
Is it true that you smoked Camels and only Camels during those 30 days?
That's true.
Will you tell us what the doctor told you?
He said there wasn't any sign of irritation in my throat from smoking Camels.
And have you anything to add to that statement?
Yes, my doctor's report just proved what my own throat told me about Camels. They're wonderfully mild. And the flavor? Ah.
Thank you, Miss O'Brien, and happy smoking.
But why do these wonderful things happen when I change to Philip Morris?
Because day after day, you'll be smoking the cigarette recommended by eminent nose and throat specialists to patients who smoke. The one cigarette proved definitely milder than any other leading brand.
If your good health isn't all that it should be, we can't help you. Better call on your MD. If it's double talk you wish, we confess that's not our dish.
But if you want a treat instead of a treatment, if you want full measure of deep down smoking pleasure, if you want a treat instead of a treatment, smoke Old Golds.
For a treat instead of a treatment, try our brand. It was a very calculated effort to sow seeds of doubt into the average person who was now being told by doctors' organizations and by medical journal articles that there was real health hazard in smoking tobacco cigarettes.
What cigarette do you smoke, Doctor? The brand named most was Camel.
This wasn't a hard thing for them to prove because it was the leading selling cigarette at the time, so more doctors, more plumbers, more housewives, more of everybody smoked Camels than any other cigarette.
The makers of Camels are pardonably proud of the standing of this cigarette among doctors.
It was very important to be able to say, in effect, that the medical community has endorsed this one, a clear implication being they've chosen it because it's safer, or it's safe.
If Americans bought the doctor's prescription for Camel cigarettes, and they did, then competing brands reasoned they could boost sales in kind with other professional endorsements.
The favorite cigarette of scientists, educators, bankers, and lawyers is Kent.
Perhaps the irony of what we know now and how little was understood then is no better illustrated than in a naive relationship between the Heart Fund and Old Gold cigarettes. A special edition of Ted Mack and the original Amateur Hour.
The makers of Old Gold cigarettes present Ted Mack and the original Amateur Hour.
Ladies and gentlemen, you know, every week on this show,
our little girlfriends, the Old Gold Dancing Cigarette Pack and the Little Matchbox, come out here and do a dance dedicated to Old Gold cigarettes. So we explained to them that this week, after all, we were just dispensing with commercial announcements, so both of them very cutely wiggled the box a little bit and said, well, can't we dance for the New York Heart campaign, the 1950 Heart campaign? So I spoke to Ted, and Ted looked up at me and said, Dennis, I think they should. And I think they should, too. Right now, it's the Old Gold Dancing Cigarette Pack, the Little Matchbox, their contribution to the Heart campaign as they dance to How About You. Here they are.
2 years later, a magazine article appeared which would change the tune of Old Gold and other tobacco companies as well.
Beginning in 1952, Reader's Digest ran a series of articles at that time. One of the articles was called Cancer by the Carton. And people stopped smoking, at least a lot of people stopped smoking.
At that point, the entire debate changed, and the way people began to look at smoking as an issue changed.
Mr. and Mrs. United States, the topic of very great interest this week was the controversy over cigarettes and cancer of the lung. Now, my editorial opinion is this. The scientists may be unconvinced that the cigarette is guilty, but I am fully convinced that it is very far from innocent.
They were starting to say, hey, cigarettes cause cancer, and doctors were saying cigarettes cause cancer, and they said, look, we better change our attack, and we better say, you know, here's a cigarette you can trust. And I said, that's silly. Remember what I say about it, integrity. Somebody else would have to say that. It would not be right, me all those years on the air saying, we're tobacco men, we're not medicine men, and all of a sudden I got a PhD in psychology or something. Now I'm going to be a medical man. I said, no, look, I've got 2 years left on my contract. I'll step aside without any remuneration of any kind, and if this cancer scare goes away, if there's faults, I'll come back. Well, it never went away.
What was the impact of the so-called cancer scare of the early 1950s? Well, sales dropped initially. The tobacco industry conducted research, and advertisers found new ways to market cigarettes. When Time Machine returns, that marketing comes into focus with the help of crush-proof boxes and foolproof advertising. By the mid-1950s, more than half of all adults in the U.S. smoked. But what brand? If the first wave of cigarette TV ads were designed to get people hooked, then the second effort was to develop brand loyalty. That was a real marketing challenge, and it was achieved right where Madison Avenue crossed Tobacco Road.
Winston tastes good like a cigarette should. Winston tastes good like a cigarette should. Chesterfield. To a smoker, it's a Kent. Your cigarette's not tasting cool enough till you come up too cool.
You get a lot tonight with a Marlboro filter, flavor, pack or box.
Light an oasis and you'll say, here's the freshest taste in smoking today.
No other cigarette is so rich tasting, yet so mild as Camel.
What's the name of that tune you were humming? Is it from a Broadway show or movie?
Broadway show? Movie? No. It's just that nice Salem song, that's all.
And what are the lyrics?
I thought you'd never ask.
You can take Salem out of the country, but
Cigarettes filtered the taste. Television filtered the information. The word was out. Filters were in.
The world's most thoroughly tested filter.
Winston has a pure, white, modern filter.
Parliament's built-in filter mouthpiece removes much of the tar all cigarette smoke contains.
Only Lark's filter has 2 outer sections plus an inner chamber of charcoal granules.
Compare extra filter length for Spring's lighter taste.
Deep set recessed filter, set deep to let you smoke clean.
What is filter smoking coming to?
With a crowded marketplace, advertisers looked for new gimmicks to sell cigarettes. They stretched them a silly millimeter longer.
And that takes some getting used to.
They offered the flip-top box.
I like things that are well designed. This box is interesting and practical.
There was the waterproof pack.
Paxton, in the world's first Humaflex pack, moisture-proof, vacuum-formed, to keep cigarettes twice as fresh and flavorful as any other package can.
There was even an appeal to patriotism, which saw Camels salute sick veterans.
Each week, the makers of Camel send gift cigarettes to hospitalized servicemen, servicewomen, and veterans.
This week, free Camels go to Veterans Hospitals Fort Wayne, Indiana, and Fort Thomas, Kentucky.
The Clovis Air Force Hospital, Clovis, New Mexico, and to all hospitals operated by the Caribbean Command of the United States Army.
To the Military Air Transport Service, which evacuates virtually all overseas...
Competition was so intense, one manufacturer offered more than just the promise of great taste, longer length, or a smoother smoke.
Raleigh. Never tried them before. Try them. You'll like them. Say, this is a good cigarette. Tastes great. What's this coupon?
That's something extra you get with Raleigh's. I got my watch for Raleigh coupons. I got my son a transistor radio.
That's how I got my new ball. And this new bag, too. This rod and this reel? That's how we got our new croquet set.
My wife got us a food blender, and we got a hobby horse for my son.
Will there be anything else, sir? Would you get me a pack of cigarettes? And make them Raleigh's.
The idea was to get people to love the cigarette they smoked at all cost.
Us Carrington smokers would rather fight than switch.
The fight was on, but the rules in TV were changing. The reason, an embarrassing quiz show scandal in the late 1950s. The government found that some contestants were given the answers to difficult questions in advance. Certain quizzes were rigged.
Went up till, I think, the year was 59. The quiz scandals were what took the advertisers out of controlling a lot of primetime television.
As soon as the government stepped in on the quiz scandals and the government went to the networks and said, you are now responsible for everything that goes on the air.
And the networks who'd been looking for an excuse to sort of take over and control them sort of self-righteously said, well, okay, now we'll do it. And they took them over.
To the audience, the new era of television programming looked very much like the old one, drama, comedy, variety. But instead of shows being controlled by advertising agencies and their clients, sponsors generally bought ad time on the shows.
77 Sunset Strip. Brought to you by Salem Cigarettes.
The Many Loves of Dobie Gillis is brought to you by Marlboro.
The second half of Rawhide is brought to you by Cool, the cigarette with extra coolness you can feel in your throat.
Tonight, Bachelor Father was brought to you by Dual Filter Tarretins.
The Flintstones, brought to you by Winston, America's best-selling, best-tasting filter cigarette.
Winston tastes good, like a cigarette should.
When Time Machine continues, the Surgeon General and Congress try to stamp out cigarette ads on TV. The networks fight to keep them on. Where there's smoke, there's fire. When it came to the tobacco industry in the early 1960s, the fire was started by a burning question. Was cigarette smoking safe? President John F. Kennedy was asked just that at a press conference. It was political dynamite.
Kennedy didn't want to deal with it. I mean, it really, it was just not an issue that any president has wanted to go near. It's a no-win for a president, especially a Democrat, because the Democrats were beginning to worry about losing the South. The South is tobacco, and you just don't make friends by attacking tobacco. And his way to deal with it was the way most people deal with it, to call for some kind of a study and to bring the Surgeon General into it.
Destroying each other.
The political climate was affecting what was on the TV air. Turn on the television in 1962, and in addition to cigarette ads, There was something quite new, an anti-smoking announcement.
Where are the buttons?
I did the commercial with the two children dressing up in their parents' clothing.
Did Mommy look like that?
Children love to imitate their parents. Children learn by imitating their parents. Do you smoke cigarettes?
It made them aware of the fact that they were affecting their children.
January 1964, Washington, D.C. The government was about to butt in.
The Surgeon General's Advisory Committee issued its report on smoking and health. And it was a true media event in every sense of the word.
The journalists were led into the auditorium and the doors were locked and carts were rolled out with the report with a secret wrapper around it.
It was held on Saturday to avoid any disruption of the stock market because it was pretty well understood by those who knew anything about it that this report was going to be a bombshell.
It is the judgment of the committee that cigarette smoking contributes substantially to mortality from certain specific diseases and to the overall death rate.
And it had a dramatic effect on the industry, on sales, at least temporarily for that first year. And like a lot of industries, the tobacco industry wasn't terribly sophisticated in dealing with the news media. They were sophisticated when it came to their marketing, the advertising side of it. But in responding to an aggressive, almost hostile media environment, they had no experience.
Well, I think what happened is that the Tobacco Institute put out a dragnet for every scientist that could breathe around the world to identify the 38 scientists who one of my colleagues called the Flat Earth Society, the scientists who still believed there wasn't enough evidence. And they brought them in one after the other to testify that they just weren't convinced the evidence was in. It was beautifully orchestrated.
Studies and counter-studies fueled the debate. Pressure mounted for Washington to take visible action.
The Federal Trade Commission acted shortly after the Surgeon General's Committee report to require a warning, putting the warning label, a very mild warning label on the package. Remember, caution, cigarette smoking may be hazardous to your health.
The labels were not required on TV ads. Senator Robert Kennedy soon picked up the torch.
He summoned the heads of the tobacco companies to Washington for a meeting, and they came. He had no power as a chairman. He just was Bobby Kennedy, Senator Bobby Kennedy. And he said to them, you've got to do something about cigarette advertising. And he said, I think maybe you ought to get off television at least before 9 o'clock. And he made them very nervous, but they didn't do anything about it.
If they were to go, what would be the catalyst to get them off?
What happened was I was sitting watching football games one Thanksgiving afternoon with my father, and just watching the whole collection of commercials. It was the most widely advertised product at the time. Suddenly something clicked. A rule, a principle, the fairness doctrine, something I had learned about in law school, might be used to do something about this problem.
Here's something else you ought to try, and soon. Lucky Strike.
The fairness doctrine is a rule of the Federal Communications Commission, which says that if a station chooses to broadcast one side of what they call, quote, a controversial issue of public importance, end quote, they must provide some time, not equal time, but fair time for a presentation of the other side. Well, I thought the fairness doctrine might pertain to cigarette advertising simply because the words controversial issue of public importance certainly applied to cigarette ads. They were presenting one side, that smoking made you glamorous and sophisticated and sexual and so on and so forth. They weren't telling the other side. I decided to try and see if we could apply the fairness doctrine to cigarette commercials.
The papers were filed. Now, the waiting game.
We never had a hearing. There was never a response. There was never an oral argument. There was never a presentation of evidence. There was nothing. And suddenly, in June of 1967, the FCC came down and handed down its decision. I found out later they hadn't really given it much thought. I was told that the whole decision was arrived at during a coffee break in another, to them, much more important proceeding. And they just kind of got around, yeah, sure, it applies. Why not send the kid a letter? And off it went.
John Benshaff, the man who fought the cigarette companies and won under the fairness doctrine, worked for a law firm whose major client was Philip Morris. In fact, Philip Morris even owned the building. Banzhaf left to form ASH, Action on Smoking and Health. When Time Machine returns, the final battle over airtime and a surprising turn of events. In 1967, the Federal Communications Commission ruled that networks and local stations had to air anti-smoking public service announcements in response to the Fairness Doctrine. When did they routinely air? After everyone was asleep?
For a long time, we were running them in anything but prime time. 2 o'clock in the morning was a perfect time for anti-smoking PSAs, as far as we were concerned.
Here are 4 good reasons for quitting smoking.
Then we had to run them in prime time, and then I remember a specific ratio that was created. I don't know how it was created. For every 3 that we accepted, we had to allocate a commercial time period in the same day part for 1 anti-smoking PSA.
How about you? For your health and well-being, quit smoking. Kick the habit and join the unhooked generation.
But in this particular situation, there was a press conference held at the Federal Communications Commission, and a reporter asked Henry Geller, who was then the general counsel of the FCC, well, what's fair? Do you think 1 anti-smoking message for every 3 cigarette commercials might be fair? And he said, yes, I think that might be fair. Well, that was a wonderful thing for us, because Geller later told me somebody had said 5 to 1. He probably would have said yes, maybe even 7 or 10 to 1.
This time, they really mean it. They've absolutely quit cigarette smoking.
The networks were going to have to give away their time. And nobody who has a product they are selling enjoys the prospect of the federal government saying, you're going to have to give 1/3 of that away. And you may not care for the message at all, but that's the way it is.
It really was devastating because it was time we could have sold, number 1. And number 2, we realized that everyone that ran, the more effective it was, the more likely it was to cause a downslide in cigarette revenue.
What the tobacco industry found was that for every 3 or 4 commercials they ran, our side got an anti-smoking message. Ours were much more effective than theirs in the sense that consumption was dropping, so they definitely wanted to get off the air and stop advertising on radio and television.
Only you can stop it, Anne. You must make the move right now. Cross my palm with your cigarette pack. Now go, and smoke no more.
The more the anti-smoking spots aired, the more people were turned off by cigarettes. Well, tobacco companies weren't about to let their profits go up in smoke.
Well, anytime anybody is able to get public service time to denigrate a lawful product, the people who make that product are going to get upset about it. But given the nature of the debate over smoking and health, I don't think anybody in the industry thought for a moment that this was something that the American people ought to be prohibited from seeing. And I think the industry was prepared for a lot worse to come, and they certainly got it.
Worse meant there might not be any cigarette ads allowed on TV at all.
As the problem developed, there was more and more time bought by the cigarette companies because they began to realize that they were going to run out of time, and they wanted to spend as much money as possible when they were still on the air to position their brands.
You ought to turn to charcoal. You ought to turn to lard.
It soon became clear that the television and radio environment was extremely unfriendly. Who in their right mind would want to continue advertising under those circumstances?
To continue advertising would mean the continuation of anti-smoking announcements. And in time, they would become even more effective, more prolific. The tobacco industry went to the smoke-filled rooms in Congress with a plan of escape.
First, they thought that they asked Congress to give them an exemption from the Antitrust Act so they could get together and agree among themselves, make a contract not to do any more advertising.
It would have been a violation of the antitrust law, ironically, if the companies got together and agreed to get off television, and no single company could do it.
Clearly, cigarette companies wanted out. Broadcasters, meanwhile, were finding themselves in the position of losing cigarette ad revenue for the greater good of the country. Were they willing to be so magnanimous?
Once the tobacco industry came to us and said, we're ready to get off television, the networks panicked.
And so the battle royal was between the tobacco industry, who wanted to get off as quickly as possible, 69 if they could, and the broadcasters wanted to keep them on the air as long as possible so they could fill up that spare time.
The networks were predictably uneasy, furious perhaps, because they could see a virtually irreplaceable source of revenue going right out the window.
And they then came up with their own alternative. They came to us and they said, we have a proposal. Instead of a ban, we would agree to advertise only cigarettes which are low in tar and nicotine.
No deal. Congress, the Surgeon General, leading health experts all said cigarette ads should go.
And the tobacco companies went to Congress and they said, listen, we've gotten religion. We realize that selling cigarettes on television may appeal to young people, and we don't want it to happen. It's the wrong crowd watching it.
We made the very tortured, long, thought-out decision in 1969 then to voluntarily withdraw from radio and television.
This is never an industry that's done anything altruistically or because they believe in the First Amendment or for any abstract thing like that. There's only one thing this industry has ever focused on, and that's bucks.
So the next big step was the 1969 Cigarette Act, which banned cigarette commercials effective January 2nd, 1971.
1 minute before the ban, 11:59 p.m., January 1st, 1971. Viewers of The Tonight Show saw history in the making, an end to one era with the acknowledgement of another.
You got Virginia Slims now, baby. You come a long, long way.
Tobacco industry people come in and say, oh, you know, we're not going to fight this and we'll obey the law. We'll never spend anything near what we spent on television advertising for print or broadcast advertising, print or newspapers or magazines. We won't increase our expenditures. And Congress left the tobacco industry alone for more than a decade. It wasn't until 1984 that Congress addressed and passed significant tobacco control legislation when they strengthened the warnings. So they got a 15-year ride out of getting off television.
I think you had to take it off. I think anything that can damage the public should not be advertised.
If cigarette advertising was going to be banned, it should have been banned on all media. I could not then, and I still cannot accept singling out a single medium for that kind of prohibition. It just doesn't make sense.
Once we knew that smoking wasn't good for you, I think it makes a lot of sense to take it out of the one medium which sold it the best.
The death of the cigarette TV ad also meant the end of most anti-smoking public service announcements. Broadcasters were quick to take them off the air. A postscript, the debate over cigarette commercials continues in the nation's courts. Personal injury suits have been filed based on some claims from the early tobacco industry's TV commercials. Perhaps the story of cigarette advertising on television isn't over yet. I'm Jack Perkins for Time Machine. Thanks for watching.
Now at last, wherever you are, at home, at the office, or like this couple on a honeymoon trip to the Argentine, now you can enjoy the best taste yet in any cigarette.
Old Gold cures just one thing, the world's choice tobaccos, to give you a treat instead of a treatment.
Ruth takes packs of Luckies right from the production line. She cuts